No, so the Q&A, that sheet will get updated as we go along, right?
Yes. So the Saumi, Harsha, and Salila are our volunteers for the day.
Okay.
They will be collating the questions. So welcome to the webinar, folks. And we are waiting for a few minutes. I think we are live on YouTube as well. So friends on YouTube, hi. So I was just mentioning that we will be collating the questions that you post in the Q&A screen, as well as on the comment screen of the YouTube channel, so of the live stream. So feel free to please post your comments and questions on respective places, and our volunteers will be collating it and making it available to the moderator and myself. We'll wait for a couple more minutes before we start. It's still 2 minutes to 3, and yeah. Oh yeah, I have the place I am in, we have a cat which is very loud and boisterous today. So please, what shall I say? Pardon me for any disturbance from the cat or the construction in the neighbor's house. So Sunday afternoon, that guy wants to do some drilling. So I have requested the owner to stop that, and he has stopped it for now, but I don't know when they're going to start up again.
So Dviji, you saying that you made arrangement for cat calls, is it?
Yeah, otherwise it gets quite boring. No, it's quite a short one. I hope people will not get bored. And there's a lot of interesting stuff to cover. So I hope we won't need the cat to liven up the situation. Yeah. So I don't know if Sabyada is joining us. So I think we shall start off. And with a brief introduction to RRA Network and the Millet Foundation, the co-organizers for this series. So welcome everyone to the No Millets webinars. And this is a 10-part series, and this is the concluding session of the series. And today we'll be talking about entrepreneurship in millets, specifically in India, with some idea of the value chain and marketing trends. But the focus is more on, as you would have seen from the earlier sessions, is going to be more on the the substance of it rather than the presentation of it. So we'll be focusing more on the millets rather than the value chain. That's what I'm trying to say. And RRA Network is a loosely knit network of organizations that have come together to work on rainfed agriculture and looking at it from a larger canvas rather than just a restricted farm and farmer. So looking at soil, looking at it in terms of the social dynamics of who owns this and who has access to food that comes out of this, and various other aspects. So needless to say, climate resilience and sustainability are the central defining factors for a lot of the work taken up, because our interest in rainfed farming also stems from a lot of concerns with regard to how agriculture has been ecologically exploitative as well. So RRA Network is about 60 plus organizations, if I remember the number right, in different parts of the country. And the Millet Foundation is one of them. The Millet Foundation, TMF for short, is a resource group for organizations and individuals looking to do something in the millets value chain. And therefore, this webinar series is also in some sense hosted by the TMF. It's quite logical that way. The No Millets webinars are part of an attempt to demystify the whole different aspects of millets. And there were 10 different episodes or sessions. Today is the concluding one on entrepreneurship. And the earlier ones were on different aspects, the ecological benefits, the cultural histories, the characteristics of the grains, the processing, the mechanized processing principles, understanding quality, and various other things. All the sessions have been recorded and the presentations have also been shared on the millet.org/KMW 2020 website for the series. And we are also compiling the Q&As and some other data from the sessions. Some of them have already been posted on the webinar web page, but the others are still in being compiled, and we shall be sharing them very soon, very shortly. So welcome to the webinars, and today's session is anchored by Raman. Raman Ahuja is an amazing guy. He has done a lot of very interesting things, and from FMCG to to foods and agriculture, he has made the transition that a lot of people desire to and very rarely are able to. And many people, never have had the opportunity to experience the kind of entrepreneurial and managerial challenges that he has. So we are very glad that he's part of the working group on millets in the RRA network. And we also have him on this session as our anchor. Thank you, Raman sir, for accepting our invite. And I will hand it over to you for your opening remarks, and then I'll go to the presentation.
Thanks, Dwiji, and thanks for that kind introduction. I must say I'm but a student in this space. I've been associated with the RRA, the Working Group of Millets, for the last 8 odd months, and it's been an amazing journey. It complements a lot of the other work that I'm interested in and that I'm involved in. And millet is a very key part of revitalizing grain-fed agriculture, and it's an agenda that has a very long-term potential and action. So great to see this 10-part series, and it's very nice to be part of this last episode. We hope that we'll have another round of these, maybe at a later point in time. We need to refresh a lot of memories for people who've not really experienced millets. It's something in today's time, using this virtual media is a brilliant opportunity and relatively cost-free. So let's hope people make the most of it, and we also learn in this whole process. Look forward to exciting presentation from you, and also to a wide range of questions from the audience. Let's hope we have time to address all of them. I think the structure, Dwiji, is that you take on from here, and we have about 20-25 minutes of presentation and 30 minutes of Q&A, and we end it.
Yes, and a few closing remarks from you before
sure.
we end.
Sounds good. So over to you, Dwiji. I'm going to go on mute.
Thank you. So, folks, we will have some, next slide business going on, because the slides are being hosted by another volunteer who kindly has agreed to do this because my bandwidth is a little iffy. So, Manish, can we go to the next slide, please? So this webinar series, as I mentioned earlier, is looked at various aspects, and the driving principle has been to look at things from a sustainable food systems perspective. And the idea is to not just look at each component in an isolated fashion, but rather to identify what does it mean, how things have gone, what have we learned, and what does it mean when we say sustainable food systems from from the historical perspective, or from where does community centric come in from, what are the different socioeconomic aspects, nutritional aspects, so various things. So in each slide, we have the slide number at the bottom right corner as you face the screen. So please feel free to cite the slide numbers whenever you're asking a question, if it pertains to a particular slide. Let's go to the next one, please. In this presentation, we will primarily focus on the background of what is the consumer space like, and what are the opportunities like, and what are the challenges, of course. And it's a short 20-minute presentation, so I'm going to move from one to the next, but feel free to ask questions or note down your questions and share them so that we can answer them and discuss it in detail, depending on what interests you. The image on the right is not a typical business entrepreneurial image that one would use, but anybody who's got a bit of an inkling of what you're seeing there, okay, let me just explain that out because it's worth it. So this is a sorghum plant, and sorghum, if sorghum is jowar, jola, jonna in Telugu, cholam in Tamil. So it grows quite tall. It can grow up to 8 to 10 feet sometimes, and but it's just a single stalk. So how it grows is that as it grows from the nodes closer to the ground, it starts pushing out the roots. And if you observe closely, there are actually three sets of roots that are coming from the nodes, and this is beyond the roots that are underground. So it's like as it is growing, the plant knows that it needs to, bolster itself further, and it pushes out these roots in this amazing structure. And I just fell in love with that, and how how insightful it is, how much it's amazing. So I feel as businesses, I'm a serial entrepreneur, and so I feel, we need to grow such structures so that we can stabilize the enterprise. And when we are looking at, and that comes about only when we have something strong in our own, in our central objectives. And the nutrition, which is driving most of the consumers, is our central strength when it comes to millet value chain. Let's go to the next slide, please. So what do we mean by nutrition? Well, to put it simply, or to understand it simply, it's the nutritional chart that you see on this table. But nutrition is way beyond that. I would strongly encourage folks to go back to the website for the webinars and look at the recording for the second session and the fourth session, I believe, on grain characteristics, or maybe it was the fifth one, fourth or fifth one, grain characteristics, and also the value addition in millets, because it will give you an idea of what's possible and what do we mean by nutrition. So it's not just one particular thing, one particular grain. So what you see in this chart along the rows are different millets. The top one is foxtail, little kodo. By the way, this PDF has been shared on the website already, and it will also be posted to you on your email addresses. So feel free to zoom in and view it later, but apologies for the small script on the screen right now. So along the rows are the different grains, and along the columns are the different nutritive values or components. And at the bottom most rows, the last three rows are for paddy rice, wheat, and quinoa, just to give you a comparison with other cereal grains. So as you can see in this, it's not just one particular grain that's good, it's a distribution of them. And that diversity is what we want to bring in our foods. It's not just about encouraging foxtail millet or building the ecosystem for kodo millet. The idea is to bring in a diversification in our cereal grains, and that's what we can achieve with working millets into our diet. What I would like to point out before we move on is that these are the test results from a lab. And what you get in your food when you buy something or you process it yourself and eat it, it's going to be different, because the what remains of the nutrition is dependent on various things, the variety, cultivation practices, and more than anything else, the processing. Let's go to the next slide. So before we get into what gets conveyed, let's understand the grain structure, because it's very important to understand people's motivation of nutrition and how we can meet that expectation that people have. It would be important for us to understand the grain structure. So the outermost is the husk, then we have the bran, and then the rice kernel inside with the germ at one end of it. As I mentioned earlier, we have talked about this in more detail in the second and fourth session. So I would strongly encourage you to go see those slides, skip through or do a quick browse of the presentation of the discussion there on the YouTube channel as well. So let's go to the next slide. So when we are thinking of nutrition in cereal grains, we pretty much refer to the bran. There's the carbohydrate in the rice kernel, which is what gets conveyed by default, which is the primary motivation for us to go to eat cereal grains. But bran's the boss. I mean, that's where the fibers are, that's where the minerals are, and that's where the fatty acids are. But then it's a very thin, fragile layer inside a hard cellulosic layer. The husk needs to be taken off and everything else needs to be saved. So let's go to the next slide. So what does that mean? It basically means that when we are processing these grains, we have to be very careful. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah. What does it mean that we have to be careful? We have to be careful not to damage the bran when we are taking the husk off. But the machines are all designed primarily for bulk, large scale processing, which is not sensitive to the bran layer. So they are bran agnostic, or they're not bothered about bran. So in that sense, we have to build in better performances into our machines. That's the primary challenge when it comes to machines. And pest management is a major issue, because unless you are handling your material properly, unless your machines are designed appropriately or your facility is appropriately designed, you're going to have infestation, and that's going to be a major problem, especially when you look at it from a sustainability and reduced chemical use perspective. So the other aspect when it comes to facility and process design is the fact that these are rain-fed products. Rain-fed products are not going to be constant. They will vary from farm to farm. They will vary from season to season. So there has to be some flexibility in both the process design as well as the facility design to allow you some degree of flexibility for optimization. So, as one can expect, any kind of flexibility, any kind of new ideas means that you need better skill sets. So, that's another major challenge when it comes to the millet processing, that we need better skills for the operators, for the maintenance and servicing staff, because these machines and processes are fairly new for a lot of people in the ecosystem, grain processing ecosystem. Let's go to the next slide, please. So it's not just a matter of processing. The processing also has effects downstream on storage. And the nutritious bran layer is not just nutritious for us, it's also extremely nutritious for every other species. And until the husk is on, none of the other species, including humans actually for that matter, can access the carbohydrates and the minerals and the fatty acids and the fiber inside. But once the husk is off, it's available and it's party time. And a lot of these bugs, to put it simply, have been around way longer than us humans, and they're much smarter than us in getting to the nutritious stuff. So most likely it got infested before it was packed, or before it came out of the processing unit, but it's also likely that it got infested in the store, especially when it's loosely, it's not packed in covers, but rather it's sold in bulk. But even when it is packed, there are pest infestations, because it's probably very likely infested as it was shipped out of the processing unit. And yeah, we'll come to that in a little bit. Now, there's the other issue of rancidity. When we say fatty acids in the bran, it essentially means oils. And oil, as you might all remember, goes rancid when it's exposed to air. And so what you see in this photograph is basically the oil that oozes out of the flour. This is actually the bran flour. It's not just the flour, but bran rich flour that we get from processing. I was using it for some bath scrubs and stuff. So yeah, so basically that oil just oozes out. That's how much bran oil is there. But because there's that much oil, therefore the shelf life goes down, because hey, rancidity, oxidation, oxygen, oxygen cannot be escaped. People do go for other kinds of packing to save it, but it has some effect, some benefits, but not a whole lot. So the best way is actually to reduce the damage to the bran so that the oxidation rates are reduced. Let's go to the next slide. So this is the overall background of nutrition, conveying nutrition to the consumer. And as you might realize from all this, it invariably costs money. So even though millets are grown with very little inputs, are hardier and therefore can grow in various soils, all that is true, but getting it to the consumer costs money. And especially when you want to convey the brand. So some of the solutions that I've been working on and we have shared on these webinars: shorter supply chains, machine improvements, skill development. We've already discussed in the other sessions. So I would encourage you to look at session, I think 5 or 4 on processing, 8 on mechanized processing, 9 on quality and how to identify whether there's bran or not, stuff like that. So, but pretty much throughout the series, we have been focusing on these aspects. So let's go to the next slide, please. So now let's identify what are the opportunities in this sector. And one thing I want to put before we go further is that most of the millets, as you would remember from what you have seen in the packets in the stores or online stores, or maybe even in your own house, most millets that arrive in the marketplace are white, and most of them are fairly bran deprived, as in most of its bran has been taken off. It's bleached or polished, as they like to say it, but there's nothing polished about it, it's bleached. So when we want to convey natural millet rice, healthy millet rice, nutritious millet rice to the consumer, what are the different opportunities? So there's a bunch of opportunities on the production side, processing, and consumers. So let's take them one by one. Let's go to the next slide. When we look at production side, we need to improve seeds. So agriculture is one of those sectors where, especially dryland or rain-fed farming, is one of those sectors which has been de-skilled not just in the last 20, 50 years, but at least over the past 4 generations, if not longer. So there's a lot of lost, lot of things that have been lost, even in terms of tools and knowledge. So, but people are ready to buy these things, and there's an avenue, there's an opportunity to come up with better seeds, better nutritional inputs, better tools, that not just that, but also in terms of skills and training, for because people are coming back to farming. A lot of farmers are receiving incentives now, thanks to some of the efforts by various organizations like FAO, and here locally we have RRA network to some extent, but various other interest groups that have been pushing for bringing in sustainable initiatives and bringing in natural farming and other aspects. Which so therefore there's a lot of avenue for opportunities for skilling and training, and not just that, but a lot of landowners are realizing the value of their land is beyond just the real estate market value, and are looking at improving their soil quality, converting their farms to better, sustainable models. Therefore, there are a lot of turnkey projects and contracts that are possible in today's marketplace, agricultural marketplace. There are various things associated with it. I don't want to get into the politics of it, or we should talk about the politics of it in some other time, not in this session. But these are the opportunities that are thrown up by recent changes in our policies and structures. So let's go to the next slide, please. So when it comes to processing, this is the process flow in a schematic, in a very brief form. I won't go into the details, but basically the left-hand side, as we face the screen, part of the flow chart is the pre-hulling operations. The right-hand side are the hulling and post-hulling operations. So what I have realized is that we need to split processing. So right now the entire thing happens in one place. And I feel that the way forward is actually to break this processing into two parts. One part goes closer to the farm, the other part goes closer to the plate. And the reasons for this and how this would be useful, we have talked about it briefly in the eighth session on mechanized processing, and also to some extent in the fourth session or the fifth session on processing grains itself. And there's more of this in on the millet.org as well. And we'll probably be doing some seminars on webinars on this particular aspect sometime in the near future. But the opportunities are essentially in tackling processing as a two-part process rather than as a single establishment process. So I see a lot of opportunities there. So let's go to the next slide. Now, it's not just about processing, even in terms of consumer products. Millets are extremely nutritious, and there are lots of things that you can make with millets which are not available today for most consumers. Whether they want, simple things like poha or avlaki in Kannada, or atakulu in Telugu, aval in Tamil. हिंदी में तो पोहा ही बोलते हैं ना तो the flattened rice kind of thing, or puffs are basically like mamra, churmur जो बोलते हैं, तो that thing. So yeah, and what you see in the image here on the right is basically semai, wet semai made with jowar, and it's amazing. It's so filling, it's so tasty, and yeah. So pastas, noodles, lots of things are possible which can be made ready to cook and sold. And that's a big opportunity, that's a big market that's growing right now. We also have an opportunity because of bran and its fatty acids. We have an opportunity to convert this into ready to heat, heat and eat, or ready to, just stick it in the microwave or put it in boiling water and then eat it, kind of things. Because the bran and fatty acids get conveyed better when you put it into those forms. But of course, it's also a lot of value addition that happens, and the segment of the market that you would target would be very different. And that segment especially is quite conscious of nutrition. So there are a lot of opportunities in this segment as well when it comes to millets. And of course, the ready to eat stuff. I mean, sweets, savories, breakfast cereal mixes, nutri bars, and nutri balls. So lots of stuff that's possible in terms of the consumer market space, which some people have started exploring, but still there are a lot of opportunities for what can be done with what grains. And we talked about this in a focused way in the second session. So I would strongly encourage anyone interested in these aspects to go back to the archives on the web page KMW 2020 on the millet.org, and check out the slides and the recording, and as well as the Q&A discussion there. So this is the large spectrum. Now, in terms of marketing and other things, you would have already interspersed a few aspects here and there. The numbers are not very concrete, primarily because we do not have those numbers. People will quote, crores and millions and stuff like that. Yes, it is in it is in that range, but we do not have concrete numbers. So whenever we are looking at markets and other things, I always recommend a cautious approach rather than going to the largest possible scale in the first go itself, primarily because it's a nascent and growing market. So let's go to the last slide, please. Well, last but one, but yeah. So it's a high growth opportunity sector. There are a lot of rewards for sustained efforts. If you're looking for short-term, quick returns, then millets are probably not the place to be investing in. But if you're looking to grow, looking to establish deep roots like these sorghum, plants do each and every time they get resources, they push out more roots and strengthen themselves, and it's something that you've got to see to believe it. We also have a lot of opportunities for innovations and novel solutions in this sector, primarily because there are a lot of challenges that have not been addressed in the conventional grain processing or the food processing industry. So one has to look at the business opportunities very pragmatically, but there are huge opportunities which are a lot of low lying fruits as well, low hanging fruits as well, and some really high fruits but really tasty and juicy. um, and of course, needless to say, uh, sustainability is a big factor in today's entrepreneurial world. There are major points for sustainability in terms of looking at it in terms of financials as well. So millets offer a good deal of sustainability, quote unquote, dividends, and I strongly recommend any existing industries also to diversify into this sector, and be able to access that particular aspect, because at the end of the day we have to move our food systems towards a more sustainable basis, and millets are very much part of that. Rainfed farming products are going to be key for sustainable food systems, and the sooner one gets into it, the the deeper they can set their roots, and the more they can reap the benefits later on. So thank you. Let's go to the last slide, please. Thank you everyone for giving me a patient hearing, and the lot of this information is available on the websites, the millet.org, millets.wordpress.com .org, which is a friend's website, Dinesh from Earth 360 in Kadri. He has been doing a lot of amazing work. And then, of course, rainfed farming, rainfedindia.org, which is the RRA Network's website, where we have a lot of things, not just on millets, but on various aspects of rainfed farming. So do check them out whenever you can, and you can contact us anytime, either through any of these websites, or my coordinates are also on these slides. I just a last word that these presentations are shared on no constraints, only by an SA, which is share alike, that we request you to share it with a similar license, and we request you to attribute as to where you got this presentation from. So thank you, and hope you have found this useful, and I look forward to your questions and to the discussion around that.
Thanks, Dweji. Very insightful presentation, and I think brings out a lot of opportunities and also highlights the challenges along the way. Uh, Picking up a couple of pointers from where you started. I mean, the slide that has the comparatives of nutrition across different millet types and other cereals and quinoa clearly bring out that most millets are at par with quinoa, which is really a very popular upmarket
Yeah.
consumption product in India.
Yes.
So, do you think there is an opportunity for the millets from India to be reaching a similar level of visibility as quinoa?
I would say surpass is what I feel is possible, because quinoa at the end of the day is an extremely specialized grain. It grows best in the Andean highlands, and it's suited for that weather and condition. So that kind of added to its buzz because it's so exotic. But when it comes to millets, the product kills. I mean, not literally kills, but as a commercial slang, it's a killer product. Millets, one is that then it's not just one grain; there are multiple grains. So you can come up with different variants which would appeal to different segments of the market. One and two, um, your supply chains can be much stronger because they are extremely hardy grains that grow in various climates. So the opportunities, the possibilities, the potential is much higher than for quinoa. And like you rightly pointed out, can we go back to that slide, Manish, the fourth or fifth one, I believe? So we have a lot of not just one grain that is good and the others are so. It's distributed all over, and it beats quinoa. Almost each of them beats quinoa hands down. So yeah, so and it's just looking at these discrete nutritive components. But if you look at the overall nutritional import that millets provide, it's way better than wheat and paddy, and as you rightly pointed out, comparable or better than quinoa.
Okay. Looking at it from an entrepreneur's perspective, and given that millets really haven't been focused on the green revolution, which got kicked off, late 60s, early 70s. So over a period of, I guess, 45 plus years, millet really has been relegated to the poor person's food, or they've been termed as coarse cereals.
Yeah.
Uh, it also implies that the availability of some of these millets is probably not grown in this period, right? While the population has grown, the people who are producing in the rain-fed areas are probably consuming them or doing self-consumption. Now, from an entrepreneur who wants to reach out to the urban market, how does he or she get hold of supplies for some of these different types of millets, so that the business venture doesn't really get starved of raw material?
Okay. Um, yes. So the issue of availability is a concern when it comes to initial phases. But what we have to recognize is that millets have, uh, it's not that they have not been cultivated, and it's not that it's not available. It's just that it's not available at the scale at which we needed to build an entrepreneurial ecosystem. And that's why I included production in my opportunities slide, because that is a big factor. And we have learned a lot from the green revolution, and we see a lot of the detrimental effects that such policies have had. And in fact, RRA network itself is looking at policy inputs to kind of pull ourselves out of those pit that we have dug ourselves into. So when we look at opportunities in millets, we have to, in some sense, have what we call as backward integration to the production side. And when it comes to agri products, sourcing is a significant aspect of the business plan. So yeah, I agree with you that it's a challenge, and it's a challenge that needs to be overcome, and therefore it's an opportunity as well.
Okay. Looking at from a consumer perspective, you shared in towards the end of the presentation, you shared a list of different products that could be formulated using millets.
Mhm.
And from what little I know in the food segment, these are very similar to what are normally available on the shelf. I
Correct.
mean, they may not represent everything, but clearly, I'm sure they represent 80% of what typical
Yeah.
cereal-based food products are there. So,
Yeah.
from a consumer perspective, if he or she is going to the shelf to look for pasta or sevai or
Mhm.
Nutri-Bar,
Yeah.
they should be finding millet variants. I think it'll be important at this point in time, again, from an entrepreneur's perspective, to look at what could be a barrier in the consumer's mind if he or she is presented with a millet product, a millet-based Nutri-Bar vis-a-vis, another brand which is on the shelf which may not have a millet in it. What could be the barrier that could be there in picking up or experimenting with the millet bar, and how then the brand owner or the supplier works on that, around that barrier?
Um, I'll answer this in two parts. One part is that there are challenges, mostly when we make it into a selling point. Millets have invariably been the food of the poor and the uh, resourceless in some sense, those who did not have access to resources, because they grow in dry lands. They don't need too many inputs, so anybody can cultivate it. So therefore, it was not valued as much. But that's only in a certain category of consumers. Um, Consumers who still remember the history of these grains in some sense, which is a very small slice, by the way. But the other aspect is that it's something new, and anything new will will face some resistance, especially when it comes to food these days, because food has become such a practice of habit rather than a practice of choice. So in that sense, there is challenges. But the second part to this, and this is what I think a lot of companies have already done, is to use millets in their commodities, in their products, but not really declare it in the same way that one would highlight, as to highlight it, or even you know make it explicit. For example, we suspect, a lot of us in the millet space suspect, that uh, nutritional drinks like Horlicks and Bournvita and others have some amount of millets in them. It's actually very visible in the taste and the texture and stuff like that. So that's a way to go forward. You don't have to say you're doing something in the millet space, or that your product is a millet product. You could just go ahead and do a good product using millets. And that's where I feel a lot of opportunities are, that you really don't need to harp on everything everywhere. Be smart about it. Choose your clients, choose your products, choose your segment, and focus on that is what I would strongly recommend.
Okay. In your presentation, you recommended splitting the manufacturing process, the core manufacturing process,
Mhm.
primary processing and secondary processing. Secondary processes being change of form, primary being sorting and grading,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Just picking up on that, what would be the kind of investment that would be viable in both of those stages?
Um, so together, when we don't split it up, we are looking at about 5 to 20 lakhs is the broad range, depending on how many bells and whistles you want in your setup, and how easily you want to process it and stuff like that. At the at the basic scale, at the minimum scale, it would cost anywhere from 5 to 20 to 25 lakhs, is the when you put them both together.
This is
Now
the
the reason,
equipment cost.
equipment, getting it together, setting it up, stuff like that,
Okay.
not the basic infrastructure, not the electricity and not the running cost, but you know the infrastructure cost in some sense. Sorry, I shouldn't say infrastructure, but the machines, the skill training, and the other aspects, leaving out the building, the electricity, and other stuff. So what's the other stuff? It's just those two. Yeah. So that's when we are looking at community scale in the same place, but actually split up in to some extent. But if we think of the urban and rural, and splitting up the processing in that fashion, we are essentially looking at farm side. We can do it at much larger scales. And if one wants to, but what I would strongly recommend is not larger scales, but larger diversity of grains that you can handle, so that it's not just one crop that you are processing in your cleaning and grading machines, but rather various other crops, so that it's not just 3 months of the year that you'll have business, but rather like 8 months of the year if you were able to diversify. So such a setup would itself cost about 5 lakhs on the farm side, what I'm saying, closer to the farm gate. And closer to the consumer, things would get a little more expensive, because we are now talking of something happening in the closer to the consumer, so therefore accessible to the distributor or retailer. And but it has a lot of dividends. So that would cost anywhere from 8 to about 20 lakhs, based on, again, what kind of bells and whistles that one would want to put in. But these would essentially be taking in cleaned and graded and proper machine ready, huller ready grains, or milling ready grains. And one could do it much cheaper too, by the way. Not necessarily 8 lakhs, but you could start it from about 4.5 to 5 lakhs, all the way up to about 20 to 25 lakhs again. So one could split it up, and reduce their headaches in some sense, as long as they are able to take care of the either the upstream or the downstream part of the um, you know the folk. So, or the other fork in the processing. So, so yeah, I mean, that's the range ballpark that we are talking about. But if you look at it in terms of availability of credit and other things, the burden becomes that much lesser, because there are a lot of opportunities in the millet space because of both private capital, institutional capital, as well as government support and various program support from the government. So yeah, there are various opportunities
Okay, and in fact, just picking up on the last point, some of the questions that have come
there. Mhm.
on the YouTube is about what kind of government support is available. Whether it's central government or state government, whether it's government of Karnataka or any other government, and what is the role that Indian Institute of Millet Research plays, and how can
Mhm.
they all of them support the development of this enterprise? You want to take a
Yeah,
shot at that?
yeah, sure, sure. So um, invariably, the promotion of millets has come through state governments, because primarily agriculture is a state subject, not a central or a concurrent subject. So it's primarily a state subject. So therefore, a lot of state governments have announced different ways in which they want policies to promote millet cultivation as well as consumption. So the Andhra and the Odisha governments have these millet missions. The Karnataka government did a blitz about 4 years ago, lasted for about 2, 3 years. Um, yeah, it's been about 5 years now, I suppose. In which the nascent millet sector received a lot of fillip. We have Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Telangana, and a few other governments interested in looking at millets. I think West Bengal was also interested at some point. So they're looking at promoting millets and dryland farming because of various reasons. Each one has a different offering. So based on your interests and your geographies, one would have to look at that. But broadly speaking, it's fairly market centric. It's fairly entrepreneurship, encouraging of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs. So there's a lot of opportunity in all these policies and states to come up with um, new facilities and new products and new services.
Okay. In your talk, you mentioned about some challenges
Mhm,
on account of the structure of the millet grain.
mhm.
Uh, I mean, I'm presuming, correct me if I'm wrong, these challenges do exist in the processing of other grains. It's just that uh, the magnitude of the challenge may be different. Is that what it is? Or
Very good question. There are two parts to this again. So one part is that when people are uh, coming to millets, they're coming to it for nutrition. That's the primary motivation with which consumers are coming to millets, bringing in millets into their diets. So, which is not true when it comes to paddy rice or wheat. क्यों खा रहे हैं क्योंकि और क्या खाएंगे, it's become the default. Like I was mentioning earlier, it's a practice of habit, not of choice. So therefore, when people are coming for millets, they're looking for nutrition, and ensuring or making taking efforts to convey that nutrition becomes that much more important. One could always fake it, and a lot of products and a lot of entrepreneurs are faking it in the market space today, but that's not going to last. That balloon's bound to burst, and in a bad way. So, and it's bad for the ecosystem as well as, essentially it's conning the consumer. So that's one part of it. The second part of it is that, as I showed in that photograph in the storage slide, the amount of fatty acids in these is amazing. It's got a lot of oil in it. And all this oil, essentially, if we are not careful while processing, gets exposed to the air and essentially gets rancid and therefore becomes unedible, inedible, sorry. So, so yeah, so there is some uniqueness about the millets themselves, Paddy rice does not have that kind of fatty acids. Wheat does not have it. Quinoa does not have it at all. I mean, yeah. So, and the profile of the fatty acids are also such that the ones in millets are prone to oxidation a lot more than those in paddy or wheat. So, but then that's also the reason why they are so good for us, because they give us that nutritional, boost,
Okay, I think
which the
one
other
very
grains cannot. So yes, this challenge is that other grains, please.
now go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No. I was just wrapping up. So please.
Okay. No, one of the things that's coming out from what you're describing is this whole bit about what's on the pack may not be what's inside the pack of millet.
Mhm.
I remember going to the website of the food regulator a few months ago looking for standards. I didn't find a lot, but I don't know. Maybe you could comment on what should be done to enhance food standards and regulatory requirements, besides, of course, making them widely known. What
Mhm.
should be done in that FSSAI space, which is the regulatory body, to make sure millets get the right positioning there as well, and
Yeah.
scientifically correct positioning?
Yeah. See, rain-fed farming, products from rain-fed farming are a completely different beast altogether. We are not set up to uh, do justice to rain-fed farming products. By we, I mean the larger society of food and food industry and food regulators as well. So just to
Dviji, your sound is.
a quick example to give you an idea in India for pardon.
I said your sound was going off.
Sorry, I moved a little back, so now I'm coming back closer to the mic. Is it
Okay.
better now?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So NIN, the National Institute for Nutrition, which is supposed to be doing nutrition everything when it comes to Indian foods, published their nutritional charts recently. The was, I believe, 10 years ago, 2007, and this one came out in 2017, and or maybe 18, early 18. I don't remember exactly, but sometime then. And millets were included in this for the first time, and they had kodo millet, they had foxtail millet, and I believe some other one, maybe finger millet, was there, which was not there earlier. But essentially,
Your voice is breaking, Dviji.
the degree of familiarity and any of the tables, foxtail and kodo were switched. That's how much our regulators and advisors to our regulators have in terms of diligence and perseverance and information keyed into millets they are. So I do not expect FSSAI to be able to capture the that they mandate people to put products to have on their packets. So I mean, just to give you an idea, that doesn't mean that there is no hope. It just means that we should always, and I think it's true about even the other commodities in the market space, unless it comes from an extremely mechanized process with very strong input controls, which very few commodities have. But otherwise, it's very tricky to go by just the nutritional chart on the product. We have to exercise our own discretion when it comes to judging what is nutritious and what isn't. And the previous session, if you just look back at the archives on the millet.org KMW 2020, you will find discussion of how to identify whether my rice, millet rice, or even paddy rice for that matter, has bran, or how damaged the bran is and stuff like that. So we just need to get smarter. So there's a good amount of consumer side work also that can be done, which I haven't actually included in this, but that's a good opportunity for entrepreneurship even in that services segment on the consumer side.
Okay. One of the things, again, going back to the entrepreneur perspective, there must be other fractions or byproducts of millet processing
Yes,
that
yes.
have value. Can you briefly talk about those and shed some light on the manufacturing needs for some of those?
Yeah, yeah. So that's very true. I mean, there are a lot of byproducts in the overall processing setup. And can we go back to that slide, please, Manish? I think 2 or 3 slides before. No, after this, towards the end. Anyway, so the the chart here, the flow chart here, if we look at that, the next one, I believe. Yeah, further down, further down. Yeah, this one. So there are some few things that get discarded, but there are primary products and there are secondary products. So the secondary products are extremely useful. So there's poultry feed possible. There is cattle feed possible on the farm gate side. On the consumer side, there is millet, what we call as grits, which is basically broken grains. And then we have the bran rich flour that you get as a byproduct. You also have the husk. So various things, that byproducts that come out of this can be monetized, and therefore reduce the burden of the processing as well as other costs on the primary product. So even in terms of primary products, we have multiple primary products. It's not just one. We have millet rice that's possible. We have the shattered kernel which we get, and of course we also get a lot of broken millet rice kernels. So each of these can be monetized to make into flour, to make into rava, to make into beauty products. I mentioned about bath scrub. I mean, it makes for amazing bath scrubs, the bran rich flour which I get from the huller. So stuff like that. I mean, I think somewhere in the slides I mentioned, our imagination is our limit, because there's so much valuable stuff in these grains that one could make a hell of a lot of things with these, and our imagination is the limit.
Okay, some of the questions that are coming from the audience are around sourcing and
Mhm.
sourcing networks and how do you get out of the middleman. Would you like to address some of those things?
Yeah, sure, sure. Um, See, I mean, pardon me, but I am not. Uh, I don't feel middlemen are exploitative. I feel supply chains are fairly efficient. If there's no role for a player to play in that supply chain, they get excluded from it very quickly. Um, so what I'm trying to say is that middlemen are able to exploit because there are avenues to exploit for exploitation, and it's not special about these middlemen. Anybody in that position would do the same thing. Having said that, there are opportunities to connect directly with farmers, especially in the recent past with this whole FPO business, where farmers are getting together and policies are being made to encourage farmers getting together and marketing their produce as an entity called farmer producer organizations. There's a lot of opportunity to connect directly to truly farmer level, or farm level organizations, people who have their feet on the ground and are bothered more about production than about supply chains. That also means that as a consumer of that, as a user of that, you would need to take on certain burdens for maintaining your supply chain, which a trader would do otherwise. So, it's a trade off, I feel. So, one can always bypass the trader, but we have to recognize that traders serve a role. And what is important is having ethical practice at both ends of the trade, whether when it comes to producer as well as when it comes to consumer. So what I would strongly encourage is looking for traders who are more transparent and accountable and answerable to you, rather than trying to bypass a trader.
That's a good suggestion. I'm not sure how many such traders would be out there, but then that's always aspirational. So why not?
We got to find them, no? I mean,
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely.
Because I
Uh,
really feel the entrepreneurs who are getting into the field cannot really go out and scout for grains.
yeah.
It's asking too much of them. Or you tie up with someone who's doing just that, which
Hmm.
is what a trader does.
So, Dviji, we've gone through 57 minutes, and believe it or not, this is one of the few webinars that I've been part of that we've not used the C word thus far. So, I think it has become customary in this age of COVID. I must ask you, and this goes beyond the presentation. What has
Yeah,
been the kind of response that you've got from different people, whether through these Know Your Millet sessions or otherwise in the last 60 plus days on their
yeah,
thoughts around millet and how millet could be part of the new normal or increase part or whatever, or not being part? Maybe you
yeah.
could just talk about that.
Um, so I'll talk about what I've heard, and then I'll share what I feel or what I think. What I've heard is that people feel somehow millets will become a central part of the supply chain now. People will wake up and look for sustainability, and systems are going to change, overnight, and move towards sustainable food systems. That's a good sentiment, or that sentiment is heard from a lot of people, very well-meaning people. I'm not trying to, diss them in any way, but that's one very strong voice that comes across. The other one is of despondence that, hey, look at how many people are starving now, how many people have that much less wages than they had 6 months ago. Anyway, the economy was in a downturn, now it's going down further, so what's going to happen to all these people, right? Where are they going to go?
Sorry, your voice is lost, Viji. Hello. Seems like Viji is just gone off the airwaves. I think what
Going to find their
yeah,
living and life.
Viji, your voice is breaking.
I'm sorry, I just got disconnected. um, are you there, Raman?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, sorry. um, so what I was saying is that people are recognizing that opportunity, and frankly speaking, when we talk about millet cultivation and the masses that are going back to the villages, I do see that as an opportunity to fill up, to bolster, to strengthen the millet production systems, because we now have people who are, in some sense, looking for opportunities in the village space. And there is a big opportunity there. A lot of the organizations I work with are in fact getting up to that and are looking to broaden their avenues. And the easing up of travel restrictions now is actually one of the things that we were all looking forward to, because quite a few training programs are being planned to encourage millet cultivation in this kharif itself. So we're talking of just in a month's time, we would like to see a lot more area sown. So a lot of friends in the millet space are trying to gather seeds and process them and get them ready for sowing. So yeah, lots of things are happening post sea, or in the sea. Actually, it's not post sea in that sense, in the COVID world. And yeah, it's going to be very, very interesting. The next year is going to be very challenging for everyone, for producers as well as consumers. But at the same time, there is a lot of opportunities. And this is when the heat is on and the metal is being tested. So yeah.
Yeah. So we have many more questions that have been coming through, which unfortunately, due to paucity of time, may not be able to take. I'm sure, as Vijay mentioned in the beginning, we will compile the questions and hopefully find ways of
Mhm.
answering them and releasing that compendium at some point in time. I must also say that this is just the beginning of Know Your Millets and understanding the millet ecosystem. There will be a lot more out there in the coming months. So please stay tuned. Duji, you have any final concluding comments?
Um, Thank you, everyone, especially the volunteers who have been coming to these sessions again and again to help us, send out the emails, help us put the sessions together, compile the answers, stuff like that. Thanks a lot. There were at least 10 or 12 of them. And thanks to all the session anchors, to you, Raman sir, for being with us. And more than anything else, thanks everyone for participating in these webinars and sharing your thoughts through your questions and comments. And I hope to continue this conversation online. We have a Telegram channel as well. We don't have a WhatsApp thing because WhatsApp has its own issues and we prefer Telegram. So we have a Telegram channel. We are planning to start some other sessions, more webinars. But keep an eye on the millet.org or rainfedindia.org or millets.wordpress, and we will keep in touch. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Raman sir, for the lively discussion. And I hope I did justice to your questions.
No,
And
absolutely. Vijay, I just want to say, if there is one thing that you want people to do, if they
mhm.
don't do anything else, what is that one thing?
uh,
It's
that's
not a
a
trick
tricky
question, but
question. Yeah, that's a tricky question. What is the one thing that I would want you to do? I would want you to ask every organizer of your talks and meetings to have a millet dish in their, on the menu.
yeah, and I think that's really what it is. Thanks for that perfect answer, Vijay. I think the idea is to spread the word about millet.
Yeah,
We want this millet ecosystem to get built from a demand perspective and not just purely supply side.
exactly.
Supply side interventions are mostly driven by government interventions. We want it to be demand led and the benefits to be attributed to the producer. Otherwise, we will not get those benefits for the urban folks. So, thanks for that very appropriate answer. And thanks everybody for participating today. And we look forward to hearing more from you offline and otherwise, and more of these Know Your Millet webinars. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Bye bye.